it's not only here in the state of Louisiana, but all across the country, where higher ed could once depend on 70% of their funding from the state general fund, and 30% of it would be self-generated. Those numbers have completely flipped. Today, only 30% of their money comes from the state general fund, and the balance comes from self-generated money. And people say, well, as the budget grows, we can put more money into higher ed. Well, the fact is, here in the state of Louisiana, just the normal cost of Medicaid, the growth of Medicaid, our UAL, and other inflationary costs, that's $200 million. So it's going to be very hard and very difficult to give higher ed a whole lot of money out of our state general fund. Somebody asked me the other day, well, $141 million that y'all put in the budget, that's not enough. I don't think there's anybody in this room that will disagree that that's not enough. But the fact is there's only X number of dollars that can go around, and there's other issues in the budget that we have to work toward. But I want to give all the other guys, my colleagues, an opportunity to speak also, and I look forward to some of the questions, Barry, and some of your comments. But I think there's a lot of work to be done. We have 2 years left on this legislative term. I look forward with working with the leaders of with the higher ed systems and finding ways to resolve it, whether it's the way we do TOPS, whether it's how we manage TOPS, the way we give them the ability to have tuition autonomy, how we do that, and what we need to do is going to be, it's going to be a partnership. It's going to be a partnership with the legislature and higher ed.
There's so many things I could sit and talk about, but the thing that really excites me is the fact that the three major players, being King, Sandra, and Dr. Mason, are all working together to try to solve the problem. I remember when King came in and made a presentation to the Capital Region Legislative Delegation. We talked about, and this gentleman right here with the microphone from Channel 2 echoed it. I mean, we've got to find some way to help students with student loans. This gentleman right here has a $70,000 student loan, and he graduated. and luckily he graduated, because if he didn't, just think how tough it would be for him to pay that loan back. But those are the types of things we need to continue to work towards. Our graduation rates, and also trying to help the students when they leave and having graduated, have an opportunity to secure a good job. I want to commend Stephen Moray and also the governor and what they have done with economic development. Now it's our job to try to ensure that those companies are satisfied coming to Louisiana, and the only way they're going to be satisfied is to ensure that they have good employees to fill those positions. And I think we're working very hard towards trying to solve that problem. I do know, we've talked about the budget many, many times, but and I think Bubba at the meeting the other day echoed it so well. It's not necessarily the governor's fault. The problem is the system. And the system is bad because higher ed is the only one hung out there where you cannot, it's not dedicated. And with the bill we passed last year on health, where it's the only thing that's not dedicated now. And that's one area I'd like to see us try to resolve. And I know it's going to be difficult, because when we talk about a constitutional convention, then you get in all kinds of problems about, well, who's going to be on it, and this and that and that and this, and it makes it very difficult. So what we may want to try to do is tackle taxation in the session, or tackle higher ed in a session, and try to piecemeal it to try to make it to where higher ed is not the only one that's always having to share the brunt of the situation when we have budgetary problems. So we have a litany of things we can discuss and talk about, but I'm excited because we have finally a few dollars that we can put towards higher education, but the excitement of it is that a lot of people are working together to try to make sure that we maximize those dollars.
I think the budget is certainly a step in the right direction for us compared to where we've been. My 6 years in the legislature, I've had 6 years on Education Committee and 6 years on Senate Finance Committee, so you get to see it from both sides. I think that, and Steve touched on it a little bit, I think that the problem that we have in Louisiana, I'm an engineer, graduated from LSU, and have been in business all my life except for these last 6 years in the legislature. And when we operate in private business, what we do in our company every year is we create a strategic plan, and that plan kind of lays out for us we actually go 3 years, but we do a 1 year, a 2 year, and a 3 year. we lay out what's important to us as a company, what we think our opportunities are going to be, where they're going to come from, how we might take advantage of them, where our weaknesses are, and how we can get those things corrected. And I thought when I got to the legislature, I would be able to maybe do some of those things in the legislature, and I found out rather quickly that it's much more difficult in the legislature because priorities have been established by previous legislators. Years ago, priorities were established and everything was tied up financially, with the exception of health care and higher education, which is the only two things that are left to cut when we start cutting in the state of Louisiana. It's important to realize that in the $25 billion budget, we have control over less than 10% of that budget. Less than $2.3 billion is what we all get together and fight over each year. And we fund, with that $2.3 billion, we fund higher education and health care. And consequently, when things have to be cut, we have to cut from higher education and health care. So reflecting back on the budget that we just received from the governor's office, we have a ways to go yet before we'll know exactly how that all pieces together. I think it was wise of the governor to recognize, probably his own personal feelings too, to let higher education have the funds that they increased, some $88 million due to increased tuition. But where's that money come from? Until we see the rest of the budget, we're not going to really know. I feel higher education's in a better spot. I think if we could take a vote as I go around the state and talk to people about state of Louisiana, I think higher education is on the minds of the people of the state of Louisiana. I think they understand how significant and important higher education is to the growth of this state, and we as a legislative body want to be able to reflect to that. Sometimes we can't because of the constitutional requirements of how this state is funded. So I think those are some of the things that we will be addressing in the upcoming session. And changing the priorities, Steve mentioned constitutional convention. That's probably one way to change the priorities of the state of Louisiana. Whether we could actually do that and how successful we might be, probably other people would be a better judge of that than I would. So thank you.
Let me address this from two perspectives, a short-term perspective and a long-term perspective. In the short term, this session, we know we're going to have some issues. Obviously, workforce alignment is a key issue that ties into WISE. Performance and accountability, that's my passion, as some of you guys know, and I will have some bills on that. Privacy, there's going to be a big push for privacy issues related to students and so forth, mainly aimed at K-12, but it will affect post-secondary education. So I can tell you I will have a bill that will cover the whole gambit so that we don't have over-ambitious legislators that do great harm to higher education. It's going to be a little touchy there. Tuition freedom and TOPS. Those are the bills, the types of bills that I expect to see in committee this year relating directly to what you guys do. On a kind of a side note, in the short term, those of us in the legislature have to be very careful that we protect the reforms that we passed in Acts 1, 2, and 3 a few years ago, which are K-12 reforms, and then that we maintain high expectations for the level of students that graduate from our high schools, that we have adopted the Common Core standards. Bessie has adopted the PARCC testing. This is extraordinarily important to higher education because your raw material, Jack and I are both contractors, we deal with raw material and we turn it into buildings. Your raw material are those students coming out of our high schools, and we all know that there's been a continual problem with the level of preparedness of those students as they come out of our high schools. So these issues, the protection of those reforms, the protection of Common Core, and these other high expectations that we have are extraordinarily important. In the long term, this is a challenge that I would throw out to all of us, those of us here, those of us in the legislature, and you guys, because you guys are the leaders. And that is, we need a long-term strategy for higher education in Louisiana, something different than we've been doing before. I just rattled off a few points that I think need to be addressed in such a strategy. In the shortest terms, we have to deal with the ending of the grad acts. They're coming to an end. The big pieces of grad acts are coming to an end in the next 2 years. We got to deal with tuition freedom. What is the right ratio between tuition and state appropriation? I mean, I was actually doing some studying last night. And we seem to be kind of in the middle on state appropriation when you compare it to family income, but we are clearly very low on the scale of tuition compared to any measure. The incentive funding formula, that's wise, we talked about that. Remediation, I talked about the necessity of getting that raw material ready for higher education, whether it be VOTEC school, community college, or four-year traditional schools. We have a problem with the quality, the preparedness, let me say, of the students coming out of high schools. TOPS, we talked about that. That has a huge fiscal impact on our state general fund. It's extraordinarily important that we get it right, because TOPS is a really important issue for the kids in Louisiana, those kids that are performing well and trying to do their best, and we want to keep those kids in Louisiana. We don't want to give up on them, but it does have a major fiscal impact. The business and governance model that we have between the four systems and the Board of Regents, I think that needs to be addressed. And then again, the last thing I have on my short list, the first thing I skipped over was what is the right funding level? We talked about that up here a moment ago. Where should we be funding higher education, whether the combination is tuition and state appropriation? We have X number of schools. It costs us Y number of dollars to fund those schools at a baseline level. It costs us Z number of dollars to get those schools to an extraordinary level. Now, we need to sit down and decide how we're going to do that. This is really important. And it's not going to be solved in this session. This is a long-term type of thing. And my last little one, and it's not that little, is the proper balance between four-year traditional schools, community colleges, and VOTECs, and how students enter that system so that they come out with a reasonable expectation of having a good family wealth-creating job at the end of the day. My challenge to you guys and to us is that we're not going to solve all these problems. We'll pick at it this year. But we have an opportunity, I believe, in that we have a governor's election coming up in the next 2 years. This gives us a great opportunity if we unify ourselves together and we approach the gubernatorial candidates and try to get these issues moved to top priority in the state of Louisiana. So at the end of the day, when we have a new governor in place, whether it's a constitutional convention or continue the way we've been continuing, working within our own constitution, we can make the difference for the students in the future, because that's that's the only reason we're up here, guys. They don't pay us very much, I assure you, despite what the citizens may think. And just like you volunteers that are paid nothing, we're here, just like you guys are, for the best of the students of Louisiana, and we appreciate what you all do. Thank you.
This was an ideal forum for us to discuss the new demands placed on us in 2014, and as we have heard today, as those the decisions that we make, what it will mean to those that follow us with these responsibilities. We all recognize that our roles are very important in the future of the state and largely dependent upon the growth and the well-being of the university systems. As trustees, we have the fiduciary responsibility to provide leadership oversight to our institutions. Most importantly, we are entrusted to serve the citizens of this state. I believe the greatest achievement during the 6 years that we are selected to serve, we're here to change lives through education. And during a typical 6-year term, we're looking at doing just that. I did a little bit of raspberry arithmetic, and I came up with some interesting numbers I think you'll be find appealing. Bobby, for the last 6 years, the LSU system, its Board of Supervisors, has impacted the lives of approximately 124,000 students. T-Boy, at the UL system, has impacted approximately 275,000 students in the past 6 years. Mickey, at the LCTCS, for the last 6 years, y'all's impact has been on 344,000 students. Ron, at the Southern system, Southern University system, has impacted the lives of more than 44,000 students. And finally, as a collective, all of our systems have touched the lives of more than 750,000 people in the past 6 years. That 3/4 of a million